Hello everybody, thank you very much for joining me for another horror film review. Today I will be talking about the 1974 horror anthology film From Beyond the Grave, directed by Kevin Connor. It's no secret to anyone who's watched any of my other videos that I like anthology television shows. I also enjoy horror anthology films when they're done well. There's a lot of pluses to these kind of films. I like the idea that there can be one connective, larger story that connects to a lot of smaller stories, as this film From Beyond the Grave does pretty well. I thought the wraparound or main story was pretty effective. The main story stars Peter Cushing basically as an antique dealer, a shopkeeper, however you want to say it, and a lot of different customers come in, and some of them aren't exactly fair with the shopkeeper, which leads us to each individual story. Now, as I said, I enjoy anthology films, but there can be one kind of disadvantage to them, and that can be 2 or 3 segments can be great, and there can be, 1 or 2 segments that aren't as good and kind of hurt the whole film. And I think that's kind of the case with From Beyond the Grave, but the advantage is kind of the same with an anthology film, in that if there's a few weaker segments, the good segments can outshine them. So I guess you can look at it either way. So I'll go through each of the 4 stories. The first one was called The Gatecrasher and starred David Warner, who's always entertaining and really good in this one, in my opinion. I really like this one. It's about a haunted mirror, basically. It's very predictable. I predicted the ending about 5 minutes into it, but it's got a nice mix of being creepy and kind of campy at the same time. Not sure if that's what they were going for, but this totally worked for me. Like I said, David Warner's always interesting in these kind of horror tales, and even though it wasn't original, I thought it was very fast-paced and very well done. I enjoyed The Gatecrasher, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. The next story was called An Act of Kindness. It starred Ian Bannen, Donald Pleasance, and Angela Pleasance. This was fantastic, in my opinion. This was easily the best segment. Basically, a man gets involved with a soldier and his daughter, and there's definitely a supernatural element to it. Ian Bannen is very solid in this episode. It was very enjoyable to watch the father-daughter team of Donald and Angela Pleasance act together. You could tell they're a father and daughter and had great chemistry together. What I really liked about this one is it was a little less predictable than the first story. I couldn't really tell exactly where it was going to go, and it also had the most characterization. I felt that you actually got to know the lead character in this story, whereas in the other 3 stories you didn't get to know the characters as well, and I thought that really helped me care about what was happening. Like I said, the ending was pretty interesting and shocking as well. I gave this segment a 4.5 out of 5, and I actually thought this one could have worked on its own as a full-length feature. Then we go to a story that wasn't so good, in my opinion, and it's kind of funny because it seems like after looking it up a bit, that a lot of people really enjoyed the Elemento, which is the 3rd story, starring Ian Carmichael, and he's fine in it, but this one just didn't work for me. It's another supernatural story about a man who has some kind of unseen something on his shoulder, which is trying to possess him, and it just didn't really work for me. I don't mind that the story is offbeat, but it had weird humor kind of blended with horror. It was very, very campy and way too over the top for my liking. I just didn't really care for it. It was very one note and kind of dragged on and on. But unlike the first story, The Gatecrasher, about the mirror, I didn't think this one had enough interesting elements or was humorous enough to really save it. I will say it had a pretty great ending, which keeps it from being a total disaster. And because these are short segments, it wasn't terrible. And the acting was solid, so I gave it a 2 out of 5. But easily the weakest of the 4 segments, in my opinion. Fortunately, things picked back up a little bit with The Door, starring Ian Ogilvy and Lesley-Anne Down. This one's about an old door which kind of leads to a strange room. It's a pretty typical supernatural tale again, but Lesley-Anne Down is pretty solid in it. Ian Ogilvy's okay as well. This one seems a bit slower than the others, even though it might have been a bit shorter. I'm not sure, and no humor hurt it a little bit. But it is somewhat creepy, I have to say, and I really like the twist. There was a nice twist ending to this one, which I did not see coming, which really made it a good and memorable episode, in my opinion. So I gave The Door a 3 out of 5. Then we basically go back to how we started with the wraparound story, and I thought this tied up quite nicely, even if it was a bit predictable. Peter Cushing is always good in everything, and you would think the lesson from this whole movie would be not to mess with Peter Cushing. I'll just say that and leave it at that. So overall, if I average out the rating for all 4 of my stories, it comes out to a 3.25. But because I thought they all tied in well together and I like the wraparound story, I'm going to round it up and give From Beyond the Grave a 3.5 out of 5. I don't necessarily think this is a movie for everyone, but if you enjoy the old anthology films, you know, from the 70s, things like that, without a lot of blood or gore, just some humor, some horror, and a lot of supernatural elements combined with some solid acting, I do recommend From Beyond the Grave. So 3.5 out of 5 for From Beyond the Grave. And as always, thank you very much for watching.